Hello and welcome back to the shed. In today's video we're going to be doing the fourth video in the wooden joint series. In today's video we're going to be tackling the half lap. Hope you enjoy. So I have an example of a half lap here. I'll put it up on the screen here so you can get a nice close-up of it. But essentially what we've done is we've lapped half of the wood of this pine piece into half the wood of this jarrah piece, and then we've glued them together. Now this half lap is on the corner, right on the two edges of the boards, and you could do that to make a frame. The other way is where we lap them in the middle of a board like this, where you cross across, and it might be used for a window frame. So today we're going to tackle putting the half lap in the middle of the piece of board. The tools we're going to be using today are very similar to the tools that you've seen me use in all the other wooden joints. It's pretty much the very basic toolkit that you're going to need to do most woodworking. So today we have a wheel marking gauge, a square, a chisel, marking knife, a mallet, a tenon saw, and we're going to be introducing the router plane into this workflow. Just makes it a little easier to make sure you've got it level on the bottom, since you're going to a larger size than just a dado. So now we're going to move on to the layout. So I'll bring you in here and we'll go into depth of how we're going to do this. So these are the two boards we're going to be using today. One of them's wider than the other. That doesn't really matter. What does matter is that we get the thickness of this board marked onto this one, and we get the thickness of this board marked onto this board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and say we're going to have the half lap right here in the middle. So I'm going to mark a line, and that's going to denote one side of the jarrah board. We're going to come across here. We're going to place our jarrah board down. I'm going to bring it up against that line. I'm just going to throw my square in here just to help keep it all square. Push that board up against it. We'll make a mark on this side. So we'll bring that all up. We'll make a little mark here, just on this side, and I like to try and just push it under the board just a touch if you can. Just make sure you're not going to get it too wide. Then you come in, bring your knife into that mark, bring it up against it. So I've penciled these lines in so you can see where we cut them now. So now what we have to do is transfer the thickness of this board onto this board. So the process is pretty much the same. We're going to have it in the middle here. I'm going to put a mark there as to where we want it. I'm going to come up, draw a line again. Bring the square up against that line. We'll hold the square here. Bring it board in like this, referencing up against that. Now we don't need the square. Come back in on this side. Mark slightly under the board if we can. There's our little nick. Come back in with the square, find that nick with our knife, which you can do by just running along and it makes a little click sound. Square up to it, and we put our line in. Now, this is going to be very difficult to see on this wood. I need to try and get a white pencil or something so you can. But we'll make a couple of little lines here. And we have one line here and one line here, which is the thickness of our board. So now we need to put our thickness onto our boards. And because it's a half lap, we're going 50% on both boards. Pretty easy to work that one out. So both these boards are 19 millimeters thick. So we're going half of that, which is 9.5 millimeters, which I have my wheel gauge set to. And now it is just a simple process of coming in, going light for the first pass, making sure our fence registers against the side of the board, and we draw our lines in with our marking gauge. making sure not to go too far over. We don't want to leave marks outside where we need to. So now we have these lines marked, we now need to mark up from these lines that we had for the thickness of the board up to meet this line here. So what we do is we come off our reference face, we run our knife along until it meets the line that we already cut, because it came right through. You'll get a little reference. And then we're just drawing a little line down to this baseline that we put in there with the marking gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on these boards, and then we'll get on to the process of chopping this out, which is very similar to the way we did the dado. So now we've done our layout, it's time for us to move on to actually chopping out and making the joint and putting it together. So this first step is almost identical to the way we did the dado. It's just a larger section, so it's pretty much a large dado, but in this case we're doing it in the half lap manner. So what we're going to do is we'll use the chisel, push up against that knife wall, then we'll chop out the sides and remove the waste. So I've got the board held down here with a couple of holdfasts. You just want to secure the board. This is not going anywhere when it's held by two holdfasts, and it's a really good way to hold them down, but if you don't, just clamp it down so it doesn't move. So the first process, as always, we're going to come in with our chisel back against this wall here, where we put our knife in there, and we give ourselves a nice little groove for resting our saw. So we're going to go ahead and do the same on this side. As so. Now I'm going to come in with my tenon saw, start at the top, nibble against that line, slowly drop the saw as we're doing that, and now we've instated a nice straight line along that wall that we had with the knife. So now we're going to proceed to chop down to that baseline down here. So you might not have been able to see that here, but what I did is I sawed down on an angle like this on my side first, and then did it on the front, and I find that's easier to chop on my side first. So we do the same on this side. Now if you come a little shy of that line, don't worry about it too much at this stage. It's better to be not far enough down to that line than over the line. So now, as I did in the dado video, if you saw that, I'm now going to cut a couple of sections here that are about 1 centimetre apart. So for those of you that haven't seen my dado video, the whole idea of putting an extra couple of cuts in here is to make the section of material a little bit smaller so it's easier to chop out with the chisel and it wants to chip away much easier. And part of the reason that is that when it comes to hand tools, you don't want to work harder, you want to work smarter, and this speeds the process up and makes it easier for you to actually do the job. So now we've sawed this out, what we're going to do is move on to the chisel. Now I'm going to use a mallet for this to help chop this material out. I'm going, because this chisel comes right the way along, if you're doing a wider board you might need to turn your chisel bevel down like this to remove the material like I mentioned in the dado video. But in case of this one, I'm going to work from both sides with the chisel and start to remove this waste. So depending on your material, you might want to use a larger or a smaller chisel. This is a 1-inch chisel. I just find that works quite well for something this size, and even if it was something larger, I find that the 1-inch chisel is about the right size for the job. If you don't have a 1-inch chisel and you've got a smaller chisel, you could certainly use a smaller chisel. It's just going to take longer to do the job. So what I'm doing is I'm going to start by coming in, and I'll show you on your side. I'm going to come down about halfway. And that means that if the material doesn't behave as you're chopping it out, you don't end up going below your baseline. So I like to just bring that in, and I'm just going to chip this edge out, so when I'm chiseling from my side, it doesn't push this out of the way. It doesn't chip this edge out. Now this is moving a little bit, so I'm So it's important when you're doing this is to try and keep that chisel flat. So you're taking out maximum material and you're not digging down where you don't want to have the chisel removing material. So what I'm aiming for here is to leave just a little bit of that line here, but we're removing the majority of the waste. And if you don't need to use the mallet, don't use it. If you can pare it by hand, go ahead and pare it by hand. You're going to have a little more control by doing it that way. So I don't know if you can see, but we have just a little bit of this line left along here. In the middle here, it's gone under a little bit, and we're almost at the line there. But we're a little bit higher in a couple of these other spots. Once we've got it to this point, I'm going to introduce you to the router plane. Now the router plane is flat, has a small blade that's depth adjustable, and you're able to use it to smooth out the bottom of anything that you need to actually chop out, which is lower than the surface. Be that dados, half laps, or anything else that requires the use of a nice flat surface for two faces to meet together when you bring it together after you've finished your joinery. This is a vintage record number 71. The blade is nice and sharp, so we're going to go ahead and use this. Now if you don't have a router plane, don't worry about it. You can just go ahead like I did in the dado video and use your chisel to finish the whole load to finish the job off. However, the router plane is a nice addition to the toolkit, and if you've got one, I just wanted to show you how to use it. So the way the router plane works is we bring it in under the little locking collar, which is back here. We spin this wheel until we bring it down to what looks like to be the highest point, until it touches and it's just skimming the surface. Then we lock the locking collar, and we come in from this side, and we come in from this side. Now the reason we come in from both sides is so we don't blow the wood fibres out one side. So we make sure it's all to that depth. Unlock it, turn it another half a turn, and rinse and repeat. And we keep doing this process until we reach our line and the blade enters that knife line that we put there earlier. So when it comes to using a router plane like this, you want to take off as little material as you can in each pass to make it that much easier for it to do its work. So now we've got this one done, we obviously have to go ahead and do the corresponding piece. So you don't have to sit through me doing that again, I'm just going to do a quick montage and I'm going to go ahead and prepare this one. So now we have our half laps cut out on both of these pieces, just here and just here. So now we have to try and fit them together and see if we need to make any adjustments to the shoulders. Now, because we took the measurements directly off the pieces of wood, they should theoretically fit. So let's give it a go. Doesn't quite fit into the jarrah piece, which means that it might be just a little bit too narrow. So what I'm going to do is hold it back down. We could plane a bit off this piece so it fits, or if you want to keep the thickness as you've got, we'll hold it down and we'll just chisel a little bit off this. So now we'll try to fit this again. We'll line them up. And I have a feeling that this will go together now. Now, to make this process a little bit easier, these inside edges just here, we can just bevel slightly. They won't be seen, so we can get away with that. And it looks like we are going to fit this. So now, since this is a very tight fit, I'm just going to put this down into the vise. So as you can see here, we've brought this together. Yes, this piece wasn't milled square, so this is a little uneven, but we did come in halfway, roughly. And if you did have this happen in a project, you could just skim this with a hand plane and just level that out. You'd just be careful not to hit the cross grain. Now, since I've done such an accurate job with this particular half lap, that pressure is going to hold that joint together, and only wood movement would probably cause it to come apart. Now, a joint like this, I would normally glue. In this case, I don't need to because it held together. If I was using it for a project, I would definitely knock that back apart, or I would have put glue in there before squeezing it together. So there you have it, folks. That's how you do a half lap joint. Now, this proves that you can do a nice tight joint that doesn't need glue. However, I would still put glue into it just to make sure it doesn't fall apart if you use it in your next project. Don't forget, you can also do one on the edge of the board like you see in my example here. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw in this video and would like to support me and allow me to continue making these great videos for you, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my Facebook and Instagram pages. I also encourage you, if you have any questions related to the content in any of my videos, please leave it in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Thank you.